Okay, and we're live. Alright, welcome back. We're going to try this Touch SE video again since the last one was stuck on my CXW screen for all the meat and potatoes. So I'm just going to leave it on this screen the whole time. Maybe not. Alright, this is iPhone 6 Plus. We're doing a Touch SE job on it. It's got classic symptoms of gray lines appearing at the top. When you twist and flex it, the touchscreen functionality will go in and out as you twist and flex it. Classic problem on the iPhone 6. And this is a phone that we bought. And what I've been telling people is, even if it wasn't showing symptoms, if I'm gonna buy an iPhone 6 Plus at this stage of the game, and then try and resell it to somebody, I'm probably going to take it in and do Touch SE anyway, just because if it's not showing symptoms yet, it will show symptoms at some point. So while the air heats up, squeeze a little bit of flux. I'll just put a little bit along the left side of the chip here. I work on this one upside down. It's just the easiest way for me to get to it. That way all the excessive hot air is going off the right side of the board. This hot air still heating it. Rearrange my desk for a minute here. I've been reorganizing my desk, and I'm constantly trying to find more spots to put crap. Okay, this ought to be sufficiently hot air. So we get a little bit of flux in here. I got a dime for a heat sink. I'm sitting over the stuff I don't necessarily want to catch a ton of heat. While I'm doing this, I usually watch this little coil. And once it starts to melt all around, Touch SE is not far behind. And with this method, really the most heat this board is going to see is right now during removal. So we want to get it at the right moment. We don't want to wait too long and roast anything on the other side of the board. I'm just lightly touching it right now. Okay. So this ground pad right here is usually the last thing to warm up. You could see it kind of still separated cold there. We should be okay as long as we didn't rip a pad off the chip. We can check on that right now, actually. That goes to here. It looks like the pad's still intact. So we'll deal with this chip in a minute. First, let's get a little old solder over here, preferably with a non-filthy tip. The old cancer fan turned on. Now I'm not using much pressure at all. Any contact I make with the actual pads while I'm removing it is purely incidental, or just barely the weight of the iron itself. I'm not pressing down into them. I don't want to pull any pads. Okay. Next, we're going to zoom in on this area. We're going to make our M1 jumper. So this is the M1 pad. Sometimes you can see they're loose. This one doesn't seem to have a ton of wiggle. That's about as far as I can zoom in. Let's clean it off a little bit, just for the sake of illustration. clear. Alright, so you can see the M1 pad has a surface trace going to it. Comes along this way, terminates here. Now if you look in the schematic, it's going to go down into the board from here, underneath, and it's going to come back up right there. So you can check for continuity between here and here if you want to. Not necessary right now, but if you ever want to check your jumper to see if you did the right thing, you can probe between those 2 points and see. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to clear off this round spot here. This is where the circuit tunnels down into the board and goes into the underlying layers. So it's actually pretty sturdy right there. This wire going to it is just a copper wire going across the top of the board. But right here is a nice sturdy point that we can put a little glob of solder on, tin it, and then put our jumper there. Put down to a smaller tip on the iron. Put a little glob of solder here. If you end up tinning the ground pad next to it, like I just did, it's okay. I'll clean that up. There we go. I don't want any extra solder on those ground pads. I don't want anything accidentally bridging or migrating over there. Next step is to make the actual jumper. I'm using Goodwick CP 2015. A real fine desoldering braid. You can use a roll of dedicated jumper wire. I find this stuff works just fine. This is fine enough to not lift the chip up or have any excessive thickness that's going to get in your way. Some soldering braids are thicker than others. You got to use the right material for the job. Okay. So we got that tack down there. Now we're going to make a nice smooth bend to the wire. Hold this in place. Alright, that jumper's mostly in place. Now, this little extra bit obviously is coming off. Get out of there. Definitely get that little piece out of there. You don't want it floating around. It'll Murphy's Law its way into finding something to bridge. Alright, and then this little bit here, we want that off too. I usually go about 2/3 of the way, just past halfway across the pad with the jumper. Any more than that, you're going to risk this thing floating a lot once the new chip or once the reballed chip goes down. You want it to stay more or less exactly in this position, which it usually does. So I think that's going to be good. Up next, we'll reball the chip. Old man Logan. This one goes out to you, buddy. I see you. What size solder tip do you use? For this, I'm using this really tiny one. I don't have the number on it right now. It's part of the Weller WMRP series. Really good irons, actually. They unplug with a headphone jack. The grip is built in to the actual tip. I go down to it's basically the smallest, finest tip I have. Let's swap out to this one. Okay. Stencil. Alright, that makes it clear. Alright, so got some ugly looking balls here. Try to have pretty balls. Clean that up. So you can see just running the iron across it removes a lot, also leaves a lot of bull crap that was collecting on the end of the iron, just oxidation. So I'm gonna clean this up a little bit better. I'm just producing all kind of trash. Because the iron's too hot. And that will do it. Alright, now we're going to clean that up real good. For reballing, I don't want any leftover flux on this chip. The solder paste is going to have enough flux in it to get the job done. So we don't want any extra. It ends up pooling up and allowing the solder balls the little micro solder balls inside the paste to migrate all over the place, and you get a really uneven covering. So I want this clean and dry, so I'm just wiping it off with a microfiber wipe here. Alright, some of those little imperfections, that's all going to melt and mix with the new solder paste, so that's fine. Alright, same thing, we'll take our stencil, line it up just so. Alright, I'm using this X-Acto knife tip. If you can find these on Amazon for less than, $8 for a 5-pack plus $7 shipping, good on you. Please help a brother out, because for whatever reason this number 16 chisel blade is a valuable commodity on Amazon apparently. Using mechanic solder paste. SN is tin, so 63% tin, 37% lead. Good old leaded solder paste. This is going to melt at a relatively low temperature and make reinstallation really easy. I like to dig out of the dry area. So the solder paste inside there is going to have little pools of flux and whatnot in it, and then in some of the areas around the edge that'll be a little bit drier. I like to use the drier stuff. Sometimes I'll even just leave the top open and see if it'll dry out a little bit before using it. Too much flux in this situation, believe it or not, will cause more problems than it could possibly help. Alright, so I've just been holding it down with my fingers. I don't want my fingers on there when we're hitting it with hot air. I'm going to turn my air temperature down a little bit for reference. I'm on the Weller, so for whatever reason, Weller, a German company, put a Fahrenheit temperature gauge. Maybe they're just catering to the Americans who are buying this. But it was on about 900 for removal. I got it down to about 850, 700, 750 actually right now. I'm going around the edges so you can see the flux starting to boil out of there. I don't want this stencil to warp when everything heats up, so I'm kind of going around the edges and just teasing it a little bit until everything heats up at the same time. So we'll get a little bit closer, kind of aim it, going for the kill right now. There we go. Make sure everything melts evenly. All right, now hold it. Wait for everything to re-solidify. Okay. I'm assuming you're talking about the blades there, John. Elusive, to say the least. Like, yeah, there we go. Alright, so now we're just going to really gently get this out of here. It feels like it's stuck in there. It didn't weld itself in, but the flux from the paste probably got it stuck in there. So I'm just going to warm it up real lightly. There we go. I don't want to remelt those balls when I can't see them. Okay. Get that out of the way. Now I do want to remelt these balls because there are a couple little, you can see a couple little pieces of mashed solder paste that worked their way in between them. And whatever that trash is, that can go. Let's remelt these one more time. Everything ought to look nice and clean after that. Yeah, everything kind of migrates. One or two tiny little solder balls from the paste isn't going to make a significant change in the size of the ball at this scale. So you're better off just getting everything kind of migrated. If you, oh yeah, I just touched it. That was dumb. Let's do this again. Luckily I didn't move it anywhere. Patience. Alright. And if you want to be absolutely sure that they're clean in between, get yourself a nice, the softest bristle toothbrush you can find. And this one's hard as hell, probably because it's stiff with fluids, but I don't know. Alright, you can use some isopropyl alcohol. I'm using 99% here. Hold or steady, and you can just kind of gently, just like that, gently scrub away at it. And you can see after, just after one remelt, there's already a little bit of surface pitting on these balls. That shouldn't affect us going back down. We'll make sure it's got a nice little bed of flux to sit in. The flux will help those remelt nice and cleanly. I'll just make sure there's nothing else. Little gunk there. Okay. Before you reinstall this, turn it sideways and inspect your balls. That's some good-looking balls. These two might be a little bigger than the rest. One's always bigger, isn't it? This one's a little misshapen from when I touch it with my thumb. Overall, I think we got decent consistency there. These are not the prettiest balls of all time, but they'll get the job done. I don't know how many times I've said that in my life. Alright. Little blob of paste. The ball jokes really write themselves. I'm just a conduit for ball jokes. I spend so much time with balls at work. We should stop. Yeah. You get the picture. Balls. Alright. Now, that's a lot of flux. I kind of wanted a lot of flux, but that's a lot of flux. That's a little more than I wanted, is what I'm saying. So we're going to have to really monitor this carefully. This paste that we just put down is going to melt at a considerably faster rate than the paste or the balls that were on there when we pulled it up. So I want to make sure everything's just so it doesn't fall into a weird spot. This side's going to go up, this side's going to come down. It's on there slightly cockeyed, it's actually okay. That helps. I find it actually helps the chip find its true center, because it's just sitting on a grid and they're uneven surfaces next to each other. It's really easy for it to fall. Yeah, this is installed fully. Really easy for it to fall in between that grid and go a whole unit off. All right, so I don't know if you can see it. Our jumper is still exactly where we left it. If you have any doubts, you can take and probe this. The biggest risk here is short to ground. No short to ground. And we could do the other thing. Come up to this point here. Okay. All right, everything's in place. I'm gonna dry this off a little bit, cool it off, get some cool air on here. John, you didn't turn the compressor on. I'll be right back. This is a professional video, by the way. That was bad, and you should feel bad. Do you feel bad? He doesn't feel bad at all. How do I reach these kids? Okay. Let's try this again. You can see just a little bit of flux paste ends up working its way all the way up to at least halfway through, probably all the way underneath the PMIC. Just that little blob of flux really just coated the entire underside of this board. So the only way to truly get all of that out is to actually run it through the ultrasonic cleaner. If we have any cooling problems or anything like that, I will do that. But one quick thing you can do to get most of it is just soak it with some isopropyl alcohol. Soak and spray, soak and spray. We're going to wipe up as much as we can. The reason I mentioned cooling problems is I have found, especially since iOS 11, when these are first booting up, whatever the CPU is doing differently in iOS 11 from iOS 10 is producing noticeably more heat. And what you get is a boot looping situation where you think you bridged something underneath the CPU or something. You put too much heat on here and you bridged your CPU pads. That would be worst case scenario. That usually means you killed the phone, unless unless you're able to pull the CPU up and reball it. That's not something that I'm doing, but it can be done. However, what I've found is if you have too much flux left over under here, you gotta remember flux is a heat transfer chemical. It's an agent for soldering, and it holds heat tremendously. So actually enough flux sitting on this side of the board will make the entire board temperature rise to the point where the CPU shuts off and restarts. Hopefully this isn't blasting your ears. I don't know what the stream sounds like right now. I have found doing this method, just soak a little bit of isopropyl alcohol in there, let it sit for a second, and then blast it out. You can remove most of what was in there and get a decently clean surface. Pretty much all the flux you buy is going to say somewhere on it, no clean flux, no clean necessary. Don't believe it. It's not true. You need to clean it. It's corrosive. Okay, so that's a pretty clean board. Last thing to check before we stick stuff back on it, make sure that our chip went on flush. It's going to be hard to see. Alright, so I'm checking the Mason chip in relation to the Cumulus. I want them to be perfectly parallel. And then from this side, we'll check it in relation to the audio IC, both perfectly parallel. If your chip's on there cockeyed one way or another, you're not making a good connection. It's not going to work. All right. Okay. Let's put this together with the old dock battery screen. Those are the only three things you need to turn a phone on. You really only need a battery and a screen, because if you want to, you can jump the power button with your tweezers. I just do a dock, especially for this, because there's some stuff we want to test before fully reassembling the phone. Okay, prompt to boot. That's a good sign. We don't have any lines or artifacts in the screen when it's starting up. It prompts to boot. It pulls a little over an amp from a USB port, so this one might be fixed. I maybe didn't destroy it. Doing this method, you should really not have post-repair issues where you can so little heat. Unable to activate Touch ID. Interesting. Okay. Don't care about that. Now it's responding to touch. So let's make sure we have a good full pattern on there. You're good. Noise levels are fine. Oh, good. So the compressor and low end filter seem to be working somewhat. I'm just using the built-in microphone on the webcam, so it's really subject to whatever ambient noise is going on around us. But just with the default settings, hopefully it's working okay. All right. I'm pretty well satisfied with the touch. Let's make sure the front-facing camera is working. Sure. Okay, that works. See, not really. Okay. Front-facing camera. We don't have a rear camera plugged in, so you can't test that. What we also want to test is voice memos. Check, check, check. Test, test, test. 1, 2, 3. All right, so we're not getting anything from the microphone on the dock. Oh, I can tell you why though. This is a new part out of new inventory. And what do they put on new parts? Stuff that covers the microphone. Or do they? No. There's nothing over that microphone. Okay, let's try another dock. Can I get that 6 Plus dock back from you? Remember, you don't have a board problem until you have a parts problem. And we were not working anywhere near the charger port connector here, so there's really no reason to suspect we have a bad dot. Check, check, check. Yep, there it goes. Test, test, test. 1, 2, 3. All right, we're going to flip this around to ear speaker because we don't have a loudspeaker connected. Proximity. That works. I can hear sound. Okay, so that's all working. So the last thing to check here is why we don't have Touch ID. Unless we bought a phone that had a home button replaced on it previously. Touch ID, passcode, and fingerprint, not even an option. Okay. Well, let's take a glance and see. To this. Alright, so it is possible to have Touch ID working before you start your repair and have it not working afterwards. Your Touch ID is powered by one of these LDOs. Let's not guess, let's just look. I just have to be reminded to go back to the camera view after looking at the schematic. Oh my, this laptop's having a hard time encoding and streaming and doing other stuff. That's better. Alright, let's go schematic. Zoom in on this area. So you have 2 low dropouts here. All they are is a little 4-pin 3VO Mesa. Yeah, that's your Touch ID power. All it does is it takes, come on, respond. VCC main, it gets an enable signal from the, in this case, the camera. It dumps some of that VCC main to ground. The rest it sends out in 2.85 volts to the camera. This one likewise. VCC, come on, main. Come on, computer. All right. 1V8 Mesa, ground. So this one uses 3VO Mesa as an input, and it puts out 1V8 Mesa. It drops a little bit of voltage, a little bit of energy to ground to lower the voltage. So if those come loose, basically, while you're heating up the other side, that's why you'll lose functions like Touch ID. You can lose your proximity flex functions, so the actual proximity sensor, the front-facing camera, the top microphone up there that Siri uses, and switching the speakerphone also uses that microphone. But all that was working. We didn't check Siri because we don't have it connected to the internet, but everything else on the front-facing camera flex was working. So we're just going to take a glance. I'm going to pick away a little bit of this underfill. I think what's more likely is the phone we bought, and I should have tested this beforehand. This is a phone that we purchased from somebody, and the screen had been replaced before. I think what's most likely there is that the home button was also replaced at some point by someone else, and we just don't have record of it. And without the original home button, you'll never get a fingerprint scanner again. Unless you bring it to the Apple Store for a warranty repair or a screen repair where they're going to reprogram the home button. So you can check this pretty easily just by nudging this LDO. Even though it's surrounded by underfill, it'll wiggle around in there if it's loose. I don't see any wiggle. We're going to go with scenario B, that Touch ID wasn't working in the first place. This is where you want to look though. If you do have one, if you did a better job than me today, and you actually tested yours thoroughly beforehand, and you know Touch ID was working, and it's not working afterwards, you'll want to look here. You can also trace that line over a little bit. You have a filter here, so this can come loose. FL1233. We'll check that too. What's this little fella right here? Everything's there. Check what we have, and we can check continuity across the whole line. We check from here to that one. Okay, so filter's good all the way to there. Yeah, we're going with scenario B. Touch ID wasn't working in the first place. Okay, this one's going to go back together, and check out that Sweet Adventures poster. This one's going to go back together. Put it back in service. I'm going to wiggle around that home button a little bit and see if something was just loose just now, because I'd rather sell a phone with Touch ID than without. But there's your touch disease M1 jumper repair. Thanks for watching.